Where does Jesus say, I am God, worship me? Now, I practically didn't even have to look at this card to be able to recite that question, because that's a question when I was a Muslim, I used to ask Christians all the time in that exact same format. It's sort of a way in which a lot of Muslims will ask this question. It's a good question in the sense that it's worded in a very crafty way, because Muslims know that Jesus doesn't actually ever say the words, I am God, worship me, in that exact formula. I used to ask this question all the time, and I've come to realize that it's got plenty of answers. But the way we should start answering the question has to do with the intent of the question. Is it to receive information, or is it to stop a conversation and stump someone? I often respond to this question with some questions of my own, and these are questions I had to wrestle with myself to discover whether or not I was asking the question to find an answer or try to stump someone because I thought there could be no answer to it. So here's the first question. Does God have to say something the way I want him to say it? When we ask the question this way, where does Jesus say, I am God, worship me? Why do we feel it's okay for us to put words in God's mouth, that he has to say it? If he's going to say it, he's got to say it the way I want him to. Isn't God sovereign? Can't God say something the way he wants to say it? Why does he have to say it the way I would like him to say it? And so if we answer that question that, well, God could say it the way he wants to, then that opens us up to the possibility that maybe God did express quite clearly that Jesus is God, that Jesus did say, I am God, and he did command worship for himself, maybe not in that formula, but he does say it pretty explicitly. And the second question we have to ask ourselves is this next one. Does the answer actually matter? Let's say we could answer that question and we could see that in the New Testament, Jesus does say, I am God. And he says it in all four of the Gospels. He says, I am God, and in the book of Acts and elsewhere. And he demands worship for himself. Will we change our minds? Will we suddenly say, you know what, thanks for the answer, I'll become a Christian now? That's an even tougher question to answer. But let's get to the meat of the question. Where does Jesus actually say this? Well, I think there's evidence from almost every page, it seems. Not exactly, but pretty close in the Gospels. And we see it in all four Gospels, not just the Gospel of John, which has been accused of being not only the latest Gospel written, but also the one with the most legendary embellishments about Jesus' divinity in it. If we see it in all four Gospels, including the earliest Gospel written, the Gospel of Mark, then we can say, hey, maybe there's not a legendary development happening here at all. In fact, let me pause to tell you this. Even the famed skeptic, Bart Ehrman, has said that, yes, in all four Gospels, Jesus does claim to be God, at least in some way. So we can see that even the hardened skeptic would say there's evidence of Jesus' claim for divinity in all four Gospels. Let's give some examples. Mark chapter 2, Jesus has the authority to forgive sins. He heals a paralytic, but before he does that, he forgives the man of his sins, and the religious leaders challenge him on the ability to forgive sins, and Jesus says, the proof that I can forgive sins is the proof that I can actually heal this man, and he goes ahead and heals that man. In Matthew chapter 11, verses 27, and in Luke 10:22, Jesus has not only exclusive knowledge of who the Father actually is, but he also has the authority to reveal the Father to whomever he wants. He says, no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and who the Son chooses to reveal him. Jesus retains sole authority to reveal God to whomever he chooses. That's an authority only reserved for God. In Matthew chapter 23, verse 34, Jesus has the authority to send the prophets. Who alone can send prophets other than God? And Jesus says, I'm the one who sends the prophets. In Luke chapter 11, verses 31 to 32, and in Matthew chapter 12, verses 41 to 42, Jesus says that he is greater than Jonah, the prophet Jonah, and greater than the prophet Solomon. Who alone can be greater than any other prophet other than the one who has the authority to send the prophets? And I would venture to say the one who actually created those prophets. In Luke chapter 13, verse 34, Jesus is not only the creator of, but also the protector of the holy city of Jerusalem. In John chapter 8, verse 58, Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. He takes onto himself God's very name given to Moses when Moses asks, who are you? God says, I am, and Jesus takes that name unto himself and claims to pre-exist Abraham. Who alone can pre-exist Abraham or any of the prophets save for God? And in John chapter 10, verses 27 to 30, Jesus claims equality with God and the ability to give people eternal life. Jesus says, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand." Jesus gives them eternal life. Who has the power and authority to grant eternal life except for God? So where does Jesus say, "I am God, worship me"? He says it in all four Gospels. He says it repeatedly by taking onto himself not only the names of God, but also the authority and actions of God. And he proves it. He proves it when he dies on the cross and rises from the dead, because he says, "No man takes my life from me. I lay it down of my own accord, and I have the power to raise it back up again." And the scriptures are repeatedly saying that God is the one who raised Jesus. If God raises Jesus and Jesus himself raises himself, then God and Jesus are one and the same. Is Jesus God? He says he is. Does he prove it? He rises from the dead to prove his claims were right. And does he deserve our worship? So much so because of what he's done for you and for me.